Fernando Alonso used an unbeatable strategy to win the Formula One World Championship, breaking Michael Schumacher's 5-year win streak. This strategy took much more than just being a good driver, and it had the entire Renault team behind this massive victory. They utilized rule changes, car design, and even had secret aces up their sleeves. Renault's legendary plan took Alonso to a legendary status and solidified his name in the sport forever. Coming into the 2005 season, things were far from simple for Renault. They had only returned to Formula One in 2002, so this was going to be just the 4th season since their return. Renault had taken a huge leap forward in development last season, as they finished 3rd in the constructor standings. But the back end of 2004 was a very difficult time for the team. They lost driver Jarno Trulli to Toyota, with just 3 races left in the season. This ended up costing Renault 2nd place, despite the impressive performances of their young Spaniard Fernando Alonso. How did Renault do it? This was the year when Renault exceeded expectations and won a championship that no one saw coming. How was it that they were able to overturn the massive deficit they had to Ferrari and hold off McLaren for the entire season? When you look back at the 2005 season, the strategy that Renault went with was pretty clear. While they were the fastest car on the grid at the start of the season, McLaren overtook Renault on pace towards the back end of the year. Kimi Raikkonen looked like he could upset Fernando Alonso and steal the world title away. But what Renault were able to do was provide one of the most consistent cars on the grid. Canada was the only race where Fernando Alonso failed to finish the race, thanks to running wide and crashing into the wall, damaging his suspension. His poor finish in Hungary was down to Alonso, making contact with Ralf Schumacher going into turn 1. Renault benefited from the troubles that McLaren struggled with. While McLaren had a much stronger engine than the Renault, it was far less reliable. In San Marino, Raikkonen was leading the race before his McLaren suffered a driveshaft problem and it forced him to retire. The Finnish driver was once again leading the race in Germany when his car suffered hydraulics failure and Raikkonen had to retire from the race. The engine design itself was something that proved uncompetitive in the first few years of Renault's return, but it was a massive help in 2005. The extra-wide V-angle engine allowed the car to have a much lower center of gravity than the competition. The team did move to a narrow V-angle for 2004 onwards, but they had still produced an engine which helped to give the car a weight distribution advantage better than the rest. The details of the engine design also show Renault's focus on drivability and reliability. Their engine produced around 800 brake horsepower, slightly less than the engine Mercedes produced for McLaren. But Renault's engine needed less fuel and far less cooling than the engine McLaren ran. So while they were off and down on power compared to McLaren, Renault's engine used far less fuel, added to a better weight distribution, and needed far less cooling than their competitors. The car had brilliant drivability and traction control thanks to their friendly torque curve. 25th of September 2005, Alonso won the F1 World Championship in Brazil after finishing the race in 3rd place. But of course, it's not over there. 9th of October 2005, the Constructors' Championship took place, where a lot of things were still at stake as the Japanese Grand Prix is mighty prestigious. And this is where this new design of their engine showed close to performance with help of their strategy. For this race, Renault had something up their sleeves: the 3 pit stop strategy. Having Alonso's first pit stop early for fresh tires and a lighter fuel load which helped him keep a rapid pace on lower fuel, which is why they had an extra pit stop to maintain the quality of the car. This ultimately resulted in finishing in 3rd place in the race and solidified the year for Alonso as probably his best year in Formula One, and this victory helped set him up for another great year in 2006. The design of the engine also helped contribute to the unique way that Renault distributed the weight of the car. The early 2000s featured teams rushing to get more weight towards the front of the car than ever before. The grid believed this would give them a downforce advantage to speed the cars up in the corners. The design did cause a couple of problems, with the R25 known for understeering, but Renault were able to get on the power much quicker than their competitors. The Renault required much more steering lock than other cars on the grid, so it's a good thing that the team had one of the most skillful drivers in Formula One history. Fernando Alonso loved to drive aggressively, and he needed to be aggressive to get great traction out of the car. So when you combine the 2005 Renault with a young and hungry Fernando Alonso, you can see how success was inevitable. There were major rule changes as well on top of all this. In 2005, Formula One outlawed tire changes during pit stops, as well as requiring F1 engines to last double the length they had in the previous season. This is something Renault made sure to take advantage of. The reason why major rule changes are so important in F1 is because they often shake up the grid. Mercedes' recent dominance spell was mainly down to their engine dominance that started when Formula One went to turbo hybrid engines in 2014. Renault were able to get a similar bump out of major regulation changes in 2005. The removal of tire changes during pit stops was by far the biggest rule change that the sport implemented prior to the season. It ended up playing massively into Renault's hands and caused Ferrari to drop off the pace. Renault had been running Michelin tires since their return to Formula One F1 in 2002. This was the same tire brand that the majority of the grid used, except for the reigning champions. Ferrari had achieved their success running Bridgestone tires and stuck with the Japanese company in 2005. What played out throughout the season was that the Bridgestone tires struggled massively to produce the same combination of speed and durability that the Michelin tires were able to. It is why Ferrari went from having one of the most dominant seasons in F1 history to falling way out of title contention. Ferrari tires were uncompetitive against the grippier and longer-lasting Michelins that pushed Renault and McLaren into title contention. While Michelin had their fair share of controversies through the 2005 season, they still produced a faster and more durable tire that played a massive part in Renault winning the world title. This would actually be the first of just 2 Constructors' Championships that Michelin tires would help power with Renault. They took advantage of the regulation changes and helped to break a 7-year winning streak of cars using Bridgestone tires winning the title. These were not only technical regulations that Renault took advantage of. F1 changed some major aerodynamic parts of the car, and teams had to react. The size and placement of the front and rear wings had to change, and teams were focused on regaining some of the lost downforce. Renault's brand new front wing featured upward winglets that they introduced during the season. This gave the team the extra downforce that they required without having to make changes to the bodywork or changing the airflow pattern of the car. Another reason why this year had been so great was the design. All of these design points show off the brilliant design philosophy that Renault had. The French team featured some brilliant technical minds. Technical director Bob Bell helped to produce some of the key elements of the car. During the off-season, Renault had acquired James Allison, who was one of the key aerodynamic designers for the dominant Ferrari teams of the early 2000s. Allison was hugely important in producing a world-class car that led to the title. Renault also had brilliant technical minds in Dino Toso and Tim Densham. While they had the pace advantage early on, the team knew that they could not compete with McLaren in the second half of the season. By focusing on reliability, they were able to score points when McLaren didn't. In a sport where everybody is chasing the extra tenth of a second, Renault shocked the world by producing a car and an engine that was more reliable and durable than every other car on the grid. When you combine that with a driver who is perfectly able to balance pushing the car to the very limit and not going over it, Renault had the perfect winning strategy.